together and have lunch together, you'd all think I was crazy. But in 4 weeks' time, it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But I think Louise is right. There's quite a lot of us that are going. We're thinking, oh, it'd be nice to have a quiet Christmas and not have to worry about all the relatives. But yeah, all right, good. Yeah, I think we
in a bubble. You've already been assigned to another bubble. I'm ever so sorry.
yeah. You're not in my immediate bubble family. Yes, yeah. All right, Mark, how about you?
Well, I think a bit optimistic, really. I think with the vaccine being announced, it's almost like we can see things getting back to normal, both from a personal point of view and also work-wise. I think with all the lockdowns that have been happening and various levels of tiers, I think the fact that nothing is going to get back to normal until that vaccine is sort of rolled out, and whether people want it or not, that's a personal choice. But I think once it's available out there, I think that will sort of start the normality creeping back into everyone's lives, I think. Yeah,
absolutely. All right, good. And Robin?
I think my word for this week is going to be busy, because we've got work coming out of our ears. So I think it's just the rush for Christmas. We're trying to get a kind of cram a lot of work into the month, but you can't complain about having too much business.
Yeah, well, yeah, you shouldn't, but you can. Life would be a lot simpler without clients, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, there we go. All right, good. Louise, how about you?
Just listening to people this morning, and I'm actually feeling very positive, but I'm also feeling exasperated. Positive because, you know, there's some good news out there. Exasperated because there's still a lot of silly people out there.
Yeah.
COVID
what, sorry?
COVIDians.
COVIDians. Yeah, very good. I haven't heard that one before, but actually that's really good.
I'll pretend I made it up.
Yeah. I'm very impressed, Jem. That's great.
And we obviously need your word, Kevin.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm frustrated. I shouldn't be, but I'm frustrated, and I'm frustrated with public sector tendering procurement processes. Louise knows exactly why, but anyway.
Yeah, it's like waiting for a bus.
Well, it's like waiting for a bus and that they all come along at once, but then also they cock them all up at once, don't they?
Yeah.
It's like, all right. Anyway, good. Well, I'm going to share my screen and we'll kick off. So we've done the one-word temperature check. If it's all right with everyone, I'm going to record this section of it, but then obviously I'll stop recording once we get into the proper meat of the discussions. But yeah, Value Boost Camp session 3. This one is about first things first. So it's about identifying what those really big things are and prioritizing them and putting them first. So those of you that have, who did you all watch the Stephen Covey video that I sent out yesterday with the rocks? Anyone? Yeah. So I'm not actually able to see everybody at the minute. So sorry, Mark and Robin, did you watch that as well?
Yeah.
With the rocks?
I don't think.
Okay.
I don't think I've seen the 2 that you sent me yesterday, but I don't think I've seen that one.
All right. Well, we'll have a discussion about that in a minute, and I'll see whether we want to watch it again, because it's quite an interesting way of looking at things. But the idea is that we're identifying what the big things are, putting them first, and we're using rocks as a kind of analogy, rocks, pebbles, sand, as the idea of putting the rocks first rather than getting tied up with all the detail of the sand. So the format for today, basically very similar to how we've done all of the other sessions so far. So we'll be looking at a bit of introduction, and I'll go through a few things first now, but then we'll be running the breakout sessions, roughly 20 minutes each per spotlight. I will set the timer. We got, you know, full house, so we want to make sure we rattle on through, but equally give enough time. So when it's time to give your little update, let's try and keep that nice and succinct to around about 5 minutes, so that we've got plenty of time for questions and for the value. You know all of this stuff about the house rules. We don't need to go through that. But again, do do be on the lookout for takeaways. Constantly think about what you can take away, and think about challenging the others. So when they're giving their update, and we're then into the questions, and we're into that discussion, let's stretch people a little bit, but also be prepared to be stretched when it's your turn. That this is the third in the 4 sessions, so we've got the final session coming up on the 9th of December. So this one is about first things first, and then we pull it together with the last session. And you know that we've been talking about this scale up journey as a series of stepping stones. And if you think about what we've been doing from the start, we started off with the idea of the visioning, and we're gradually getting through to that alignment and the execution, and pulling in the leadership aspect with that, about developing ourselves as a leader, but also people coming up behind us within the organization as leaders, but also making sure then that we do get through to championing that execution. What you may or may not know, you saw where that dotted line is with the 8 to 12. What you may or may not know is in this country, 96% of all businesses fall to the left of that line. So they do not make it beyond the sort of 10 to 12 employee level. In fact, 10 is the official definition. And it's typically, obviously it depends on the type of company, but broadly speaking, that's about £1 million turnover. And most businesses never get there. And there's a number of reasons for that. But one of those reasons is we know is around what we're discussing here and what we're trying to do with the BoostCamp, which is around the leadership. So if the desire is there to do it, sometimes as leaders, we're not ready to be able to build a business that goes beyond what we can control as an individual, because that's typically the point at that sort of 8 to 12 people, is we can just about, if we've got a good business, a good idea, good product, good service, whatever, we can just about get there and just about keep control of it as an individual running that business. But to get beyond that, we've got to create a business that isn't dependent on us as the leader of the business. So that's part of what we're about, and therefore, so that's that leadership, that understanding, but also then how do we start to structure the business in a way that we can create that. And that's a lot of what we're trying to do with BoostCamp, as to at least sow the seeds for that. And we talked before about the leadership, about the vision, alignment, and execution, and that's what I was referring to when I was saying about pulling it all together. But so we're not just focusing on the vision, but equally not just focusing on the tactics or the execution, but we're trying to find a framework that pulls it all together, combined with the idea of the values. So what you all should have from your takeaways from before is you should have 1 or 2 leadership type habits that you've identified and said that you're going to work on, but you should also have 1 or 2 of the value drivers that you've identified as being important for the business. And when it comes to the 90-day planning approach, one of the things that you want to do is bring those into the 90-day planning. So we should be thinking about leadership, and we should be thinking about value, as well as where we're trying to get to with our goals with the business and what's urgent, what's important, but making sure that we are thinking about the leadership and the value aspects as well when we do that. And it's all about bridging that strategy execution gap, as we've spoken about a couple of times. And many of us are better at one side or the other, and again, linking it back to our personality profiles, some of us are naturally better at thinking about the big picture and the strategy. Some of us are naturally better at cracking the whip and making sure we've got an eye on the detail and that we're championing that execution. Not very many of us are good at the whole lot and bringing people along with us, the alignment bit along the way. So constantly reminding ourselves about that and the importance of being able to do all of it and make sure all of it happens in the business is no bad thing. So you've all had a look at the introductory videos around the 90-day planning, and that one of the first ones then was the importance of taking action, essentially, which it sounds obvious, but there was that example that I've just pulled this slide here about the people that the study around exercise, and it wasn't enough just to be motivated and understand why it's important to do something and have goals. it's about taking that action and writing it down as to what your plan of action is that makes all the difference. So simply the act of identifying and committing to things that you're going to do and writing them down or capturing them in some way is likely to lead to a much higher success rate of achieving what you're trying to achieve. Just simply, without any clever analysis or whatever. So that's certainly a key takeaway. Okay, and we had the six honest men idea as well. The idea of any action plan is going to have the what we're trying to achieve, why we're trying to achieve it, when, how, where and who as the key things there. But you had all that in the introductory video, and you also then understand really the importance of this whole 90-day planning idea is something that can really bridge that gap between the vision and the execution. That's what we're saying here. Really, it's a tool that enables you to have those discussions, but to identify the big things, the first things first, but also then to put in place a mechanism whereby you can make sure that everybody knows what they're doing and that it gets done. And these other things here that are on the slide in terms of giving that clarity, but it gives you that alignment, but it also gives the flexibility, because if you're using it properly, as an absolute minimum, once every 90 days, you're having discussions around what's changed and what do we need to bring in, as opposed to the usual thing. If we're lucky, most business owners will do an annual plan, but certainly not every business owner does even an annual plan. But if we're discussing things every 90 days, then we've got that chance to be flexible while still keeping true to our long-term aims. But also, if you build it in, and we'll talk more maybe the next time about building in a rhythm to make sure that these things are done in between the 90 days, then you've got that much greater chance of the actions being done. But also, if we do it right, we've given really clear responsibilities and ownership of some of these big priorities. And if we think back to this model of Stephen Covey, essentially the 90-day planning is helping us to put those first things first, as well as beginning with the end in mind. Two big things there. And if we're doing it really well, then it also brings in that horrible word of synergize on the left-hand side there, horrible American sort of type word, but what it's about then is we're pooling the ideas and collaboration with other people within the business, ideally, and maybe from outside the business, to make sure that we're working together on identifying properly the rocks that need to be done. So that was a quick whiz through. You've all had a little bit of a discussion individually around the template that we have around something we call the Smart 90. And this idea of it being a two-pager, and the core of it being the priorities. So on the left-hand one there, the thing that's circled, that's ringed about the priorities with a KPI. So that's for the business, that first side, and the reverse side is much more about the individual. So were there any, before we go too much further, were there any questions that came up that you'd like to address now before we get into individual spotlights around it? Does it all make sense? Yeah, Peter.
I found that things like the KPIs were a little bit challenging to identify on the business goals, and I think it might depend on whether they're numerical or whether they're actually something that's the action is measurable in some way. So yeah, that was a sticking point for me.
That's a really good point, because it doesn't have to be. Typically, we think of a KPI as being, might be sales. Or we think of it as being a number, of a big number of something, or number of leads or number of telephone calls, which of course it could be, but it could also be the fact that we've put something in place. So let's just say it could be one priority might be to develop a good 90-day planning process. All right. Now, the as measured by is the question then. So what's the KPI? What's the as measured by? The as measured by might be that it's documented and signed off, for example. That would be perfectly sensible KPI. So the phraseology of a good priority is the business must achieve something, whatever it is, as measured by something else. So it doesn't have to. Does that help, Peter?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So it doesn't literally have to be a number like we've got to do 20 of them or 100 of them or something. Louise, were you going to add something to that?
Yeah, I was just thinking it's a case of understanding, what does success look like? I was talking to somebody the other day about this very thing at KPIs and how do we measure it, and somebody said to me, well, in the next 12 months, we want to be the go-to company for X. And I said, okay, well, that's fine. How are we going to measure that? How will you know when you've succeeded? And so thinking through that, how will you know when you've got there? That will create your KPI, and it doesn't have to be a number. There might be some other way of measuring it, but it is just thinking, if that's where I want to get to, how am I going to know I've got there? I'm just thinking about it that way.
Yeah, great. And that sorry, Jem, yes, you look like you were going to ask something.
Sorry, no, if you were going to answer that, no, I'll come back. I'll come back in a sec, Kevin. Sorry.
Well, all I was going to say was that idea of then, what does good look like, beginning with the end in mind. The way that I find helps me to think about the priorities for the next 90 days is essentially to say, well, if I was sat here in 90 days time, what do I want good to look like? Exactly as Louisa said, what would make me say that was a good quarter? And if I start from that, then it helps me to identify the priorities that go with it. Yeah. So Jem, yeah.
Yeah, I think the thing I struggle with with this is at what level I put each rock, pebble, and sand. Yep. And I think I mix them up, and I think I tend to make the rocks way too blue sky, and then I think I'd promote some of the pebbles to be rocks, and then some of the pebbles are put into sand, and I find it quite difficult to differentiate between the three.
Yeah. And I think that's absolutely fair enough. And this is one of those things that we don't have to be perfect at it to start it. And it doesn't, so I'll give you a little bit of guidance on exactly what you've asked in a minute, but we don't have to necessarily get it absolutely perfect from the start. The point is, if we start it and try it, and then as we do it the next time around, we think, oh, actually, maybe we could have been a bit more specific. When it comes to assessing at the end of the 90 days, for example, or partway through, did we do that well enough? And you go, well, actually, I don't know, because we can't measure it. Or then you're going to be thinking, okay, well, next time around, I need to be a bit more specific in how I do my rock. Or equally, if you find that you've got too many things on there and you're not achieving them, you'll probably be thinking, actually, maybe what we need to do is just hone it down and come up with 3 or 4 really big ones, really good ones, as opposed to 7 or 8 other ones. And you'll see on there that it's got 7 down there. That is the absolute maximum. Louise will probably add something into this in a minute, but on the priorities for the business, you probably don't want, I would say 5 or 6 is probably the tops that you want. If you've got more than that, then as you said, you're starting to stray into a to-do list rather than, and you're bringing in some of your pebbles maybe, or Mel's just arrived. She had an appointment that she had to go to, so I just let her in. But also when it comes down to the individual rocks, so as now on the second page here, then typically, certainly if you're looking at bringing other people within the business there, I wouldn't expect them to have more than 3 or 4 rocks. So if you think along those lines, and if you end up with a big long list, it's like, hang on a minute, these can't all be our rocks, or our priorities. Let's whittle them down a little bit. What's really important? And you can always ask the question, and this is where the critical number might help. If you ask the question, okay, what is the one number or the one thing that if we did it well this quarter, we'd say that's a good quarter, right? then that should help you identify your critical number and your top priority. And equally, you can then potentially, if you've got too many, you can whittle down some of the others. Louise, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to build on this business that you were talking about perfection, and I think, you know, that is something that I come across quite regularly when you're talking to people. It's almost like I've got to get it perfect before I start it, and the answer is no, you don't. You know, we very rarely get things absolutely right first time, but to have the right idea with the right sort of top level priority and then work your way through it. You know, we talk about there's a cycle called the Deming cycle: plan, do, check, act. It's just a simple continuous improvement cycle way of thinking, which is, and that's what we're talking about here. Plan what you want to do it, check it's doing what you wanted it to do, and act on that. And if you get that into your head, and it's just one of these constant things, you can use it with big projects, you can use it with simple decisions. Plan, do, check, act. Think what it is you're going to do and how you're going to measure it. Do it. Check that it's doing it, act on that. Just think about that continuous cycle. And therefore you don't get tied up with it being absolutely perfect from the first time, because you're thinking, I'm going to be moving this forward continuously and continuously making improvements as you go along. Hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely.
For those of you who want to know more, it's called the Deming cycle, D-E-M-I-N-G. Yeah.
So it's exactly that. We want this to become a habit. So, you know, we want, if we do this right, then we're doing it every 90 days, and we're doing some things in between as well, but we're doing this every 90 days, and we just get in the habit of doing it. So we're booking it in the diary, we're spending the, you know, and we hone our approach to it, and we make it better and better and better until it just becomes a natural habit of the business that we've got. And that's where we're getting to. So we've discussed individually with you this particular approach, and the template that's resulted from it with Smart 90 has got some of the longer term elements in it as well, the visioning, the core values, so that we've got that big picture in mind. We've got the visioning piece, and that everybody can see that every time. But essentially what that's trying to help us to do is, if we marry that with what's going on currently, what's top of our minds currently, we should then help to get really good priorities. So the core of it that are ringed here on these slides, if you did nothing else in a 90-day planning process, but you came up with a list of 5 or so priorities with KPIs, and then you made sure there was an owner for every one of those priorities, and that the key people in your leadership team at least then develop their own rocks on the next page, on the second page. So they develop their own individual rocks and actions to go with them. If you did nothing else, that's a great start. Yeah. To do it absolutely brilliantly, yes, there's a process. In fact, we run workshops on it once a quarter, where we help people go through the whole process. But the end result is a really good set of priorities for the business that's agreed with the senior leadership team, individual rocks and individual actions, and making sure that every single priority has got somebody that owns it, so that nothing slips between the cracks. And then you've got that whole, there's a story, there's a narrative that then runs from the long-term strategic visioning values right the way through to what are we doing on the ground right now to achieve this. And equally clearly, if you did it the other way around, then you said, well, if everybody achieves their actions, that means everybody will achieve their individual rocks, or it should do, which if we've done the actions right and identified them correctly, if everybody achieves their individual rocks correctly, that should mean that the business achieves its priorities for that 90 days. If the business achieves its priorities for this 90 days, and it does it for 494 trots, 490 days on the trot, it will achieve its 1-year critical paths. And if it does that consistently, it'll be well on the way to achieving its 3-year, et cetera, et cetera. So it should all tie together if it's done well. All right. Okay. So I will, and I'll say at the end, you know, there is a a full webinar. You had the introductory ones before this session. After the session, I will send you a more detailed webinar, that tutorial, if you like, that takes you through all of this and actually a process for doing it really well, which is essentially the process that we do on our 90-day workshops. So you'll have all of the detail to do that. From what everybody's saying, with possibly one or two exceptions, you've seen this little video on the rocks. I won't replay it. Apart from the fact that I find his accent extremely annoying and creepy. I don't know about anybody else, but it's a really good little illustration of how it works. And just as a reminder, because Robin's probably sat there thinking, what's all this talk about pebbles and sand? And is it going to play? No, it's not going. I thought it was going to play for a minute. You're probably wondering what we're talking about. The idea is, as you can see here, he's got two jars or buckets. Essentially, he's got some big rocks. He's got some pebbly type things, and he's got some sand essentially, and it's all pre-arranged so that they will all fit into one of those tubs, but only if you put them in the right order. So, you know, if you put the sand in first, and then you put the pebbles in, and then you try and fit the rocks, you'll find they stick out the top, and they don't go in. Whereas if you put the rocks in first, all the pebbles will settle down in between the gaps in the rocks, and likewise with the sand, and then they'll fit in nicely. So it's identifying what those rocks are, and making sure that we put them first, and that we build time into our days and weeks and months to make sure that we're working on those, and that they don't end up dropping off the end of our to-do list, essentially, because otherwise we get caught up in the day-to-day and find that they disappear. So I think that is probably there is one slight twist on it, which, because there's a couple of videos around this going around, by the way, which is, there's one slight twist, which is on one video, somebody opens up a can of lager at the end of it and pours that in and says, no matter how busy you are, there's always time for a beer at the end of the day. But I'm not totally sure that's you can't go out and do that in the pub anyway at the minute, but hopefully soon. All right, so let's do that. Right, I'm going to stop sharing in a moment. But are there any final questions before we go into the breakouts? No? All right, let me stop recording.